Ooh, this is exotic. Muscle Cat Media. Nice. Cultural.
Well, it's nearly the weekend in Australia, so that means it's time for the weekend pickoff here on the Baseball Expats. Look, full transparency, we're doing this a bit early because Spoon, well, he's excited. He has places to be. Spoon was in the recording booth like 3 minutes before I was, which has never happened, I don't think. And he started to get worried because he's never been alone for that long in his entire life, left to his own devices. So he was a glass case of emotion, but I think that just shows how excited our man is for the weekend. Not only for the baseball, but because you're heading to regional South Australia for the weekends. But
Yeah, heading over to a little place called Cowell with a population that just gets a comma, and I mean just, for a little bit of a change of scenery. My partner's out there doing the hard yards, earning visa eligibility, so I figured I should contribute 2 or 3 days of what is a permanent existence for her for 3 months and lighten the load a little bit, so to speak. So yeah, going to be missing a little bit of sport over the weekend, which is very unlike me. But some things are worth making that sacrifice for. Not many, but some.
I spent, I don't even remember how long it was, maybe like 4.5, 5 months in Cooktown in far North Queensland, like 2 years ago. For the same reason, the wife moved up there. She was doing a midwifery consulting job and convinced me to go with her. And similar sort of vibes. Like Cooktown's kind of the same. Like they barely have a comma in terms of having more than 1,000 people. I think it's probably slightly larger than Cowell. But I must say, look, and you won't have enough time to understand its charm. It took me about 4 or 5 months to understand the charm of Cooktown. And from what I understand, you're going to pick up Sophia and drive straight to Port Lincoln. So you may not be even in the town long enough for the car to turn off. But I must say, as look, I don't know, an American who grew up in a rural area, and look, rural central southern United States is a lot different to bush Australia. But I must say that I am a fan of country towns all over Australia, mainly because there is generally always, and I mean always, almost without a single exception, an exceptional pub in every country town that you go to in this country.
How many pubs in Cooktown?
Well, it depends on the day because the top pub sometimes would close on a Saturday because the guy who owns it wanted to go fishing. So, you could just make the pilgrimage down about a half an hour walk from where we live to go to the pub on a Saturday, and sometimes it'd be closed. So that would leave you with only two, one of which was a proper hotel, a resort, they called it. Those listening can't see me, but I am doing air quotes with my pointer and middle finger on both hands. It was a resort, the Sovereign it was called, but it was a hotel, meaning they could basically just serve you beer in the lobby of the hotel. And then there was an RSL, which is where we spent most of our time, to be honest, and where most of our friends came from our time in Cooktown. So if you're not going to make friends in the pub, you're not going to make friends over a beer in a country town, you're probably not going to make friends. Though I will say, it probably took about 6 or 7 times for us to walk into that place for somebody to finally come over and talk to us, because it is a bit of a touristy town with people driving all the way up to Cape York. It's the last bastion, right? It's the last place you can stop. So they're used to seeing unfamiliar faces, but only like once. So once they saw us like 6 or 7 times, it was like, okay, what's going on with you two guys?
They
Then they hear an Irish accent and an American accent, and we're best friends for life. So I will say that country towns in Australia, I mean, Lismore, it's certainly not as country a town as, like a Cowell or a Cooktown, but probably one of the best baseball towns in this country in Lismore. I mean, I've been on the record. Many people listen to this podcast will know that I've been on the record talking about how much I love Lismore in the far north coast of New South Wales. They've got more than just one good pub in Lismore.
They got a racetrack. I think I had a quaddie at Lismore once, so I enjoy the town of Lismore too.
And a town next door, believe it or not, that's called Casino.
There's a dog's track there, right?
There is indeed. What a country we live in here in Australia. Look, we will talk a little bit of baseball. That was my attempt at a segue in talking about a country town that is a good baseball town, but Lismore is certainly that. Just quickly, at time of recording, the Dodgers and the Mets game just finished. Shohei obviously pitching for the first time, I think, in 3 or 4 years while not hitting, because he basically got the reverse of a half day off. I don't know what we even call that. Do we call that the Shohei? Normally, a guy gets half a day off when he's DHing, right? And he's a position player. Shohei gets half a day off when he starts and has probably his best, one of his best ever outings as a starting pitcher, but doesn't have to hit. I wonder if that becomes part of the equation for Dave Roberts. It has to factor into the equation, right? The fact that he pitched so well. I mean, look, it was against a hapless Mets team who can't buy their way to a victory at the moment. But when he goes out and pitches like that because he doesn't have to worry about hitting, there's got to be something to that, right?
Yeah, and it must have been really tough for Dave Roberts, who the ESPN broadcaster said should have more Manager of the Year awards, which is the most insane thing I've ever heard. But credit to Dave Roberts for somehow managing to fill that lineup without Ohtani. It would have been really difficult to go and find 9 capable offensive players in that organization. They're obviously a little bit low on talent over there. So, yeah, I mean, sarcasm aside, to your point, I think it's a lot easier knowing that they can just go and plug someone else into that role. I mean, Mookie Betts is out of the lineup too. They still scored 8 runs today. Dalton Rushing hit a grand slam off Devin Williams. Pages has remained very, very hot to start the year. So they're kind of getting production from everyone else, which makes that a more likely outcome, I guess, and probably a terrifying proposition for teams in the playoffs to know that Ohtani could potentially go up a notch if he's only pitching. Because he gave up a 1-run double to MJ Melendez, who randomly looked like the real MJ against Ohtani. He was his only 2 hits. And then after that, he threw 4 straight fastballs over 100. So if he's getting that upper velo and he had more swings and misses than he ever has in a Dodgers start, I'm assuming with that disclaimer that it wasn't, career best, but he struck out a lot of Mets hitters. He did so very easily. And yeah, I think it's terrifying for the league right now to see that team at 14-4 and maybe learning new things about themselves.
For fear of me looking this up, because anybody who listened to our episode earlier this week would know that my computer is about to explode, and I haven't replaced it, even though I said I was going to. Who was the leadoff hitter for the Dodgers today?
Kyle Tucker hit leadoff, and I think he homered and doubled or something modest.
He's well on his way to winning that MVP that we said that he wouldn't, Kyle Tucker.
If he wins the MVP, I'll get a Dodgers tattoo on my chest.
Well, I mean, if ever there was a reason to cheer for the Los Angeles Dodgers, I guess we have one now. We will play this audio back, and Kyle Tucker wins the MVP. You didn't say what year he had to win the MVP. You just said he had to win it. So Kyle Tucker 7 years from now when he goes on a tear. Look, there's no reason to harp on anymore about the Mets. I mean, we talked about them earlier in the week, and you essentially declared them dead, and they haven't done anything in the last 3 days to tell us that that's going to change. I mean, that is a team that should be a whole lot better than they are. They basically changed probably a lot more offensively than they needed to in the offseason. And a lot of the moves that they made, you potentially thought that they would maybe be a little bit better of an offense, but they're just not showing that at the moment. We talked the last couple episodes about teams that basically you're not high on, teams that you think you can essentially bury the hatchet at the moment and say that their season's over, albeit, look, we are being a bit tongue-in-cheek, but teams that were in trouble. So heading into the weekend, we're going to be a little bit more positive. And I want to know some of the teams that are on the other side of the spectrum. Maybe some of those teams that were unexpected that you didn't necessarily think would be in the spot that they're in currently, or are just sort of digging away and digging the vibes, as you like to call them, but really digging the way that they're playing and going about their business.
Yeah, I think, to your point, it's early in the season and we still try to figure out what teams, it's not just a hot start or a poor start, but a big part of the calculation, and it will go on throughout the season, is the quality of opponent or the strength of schedule so far. And I think that can tell you a lot more about teams sometimes than just the win-loss record. Really easy for me to start off with the Arizona Diamondbacks, obviously. Going 11-8 to start the year after they just played 9 games on the road against the Phillies, Mets, and Orioles, who are 3 teams that were expected to be almost playoff locks heading into the season. The Mets are doing their best to remove themselves from that conversation, but to go 6-3 on a road trip like that and win all 3 series is pretty remarkable, I think. And if you look at relative power index on ESPN that ranks, the strength of the schedule that you've had so far, the D-backs have had the toughest out of anyone in baseball. So to be sitting at 11-8 and now heading home for a little while for a homestand, I think is a really quality start by them. Another team I have loved the start for, and I love even more because I've got a fair bit of money on them to win their division, is the Atlanta Braves. They're now 12-7, and they're seventh on baseball's relative power index as far as the quality of opponents they've played. They look like it's just coming together in a way that, when we did our division previews, I was kind of expecting, because they didn't have a rotation at all last year. And, Acuna was out injured for parts of the season. By the time some of their guys came back, the season was already over. So for them to have a start like they've had and be 12-7, and realistically, I mean, there's still upside on guys like Acuna. I think he's batting just below 200, or maybe he jumped above that with a couple of hits today. I think he's only got the one home run. Austin Riley's off to a really slow start. Like, there's a lot of upside, I think, still to come for Atlanta. But where they're seeing benefit is just having 5 healthy starters, and that rotation's been really good so far. So loving what I'm seeing from Atlanta. And then the third one I want to highlight, and probably one of the teams I'm really excited to watch this weekend, because I think their series is going to be quite critical early, is the Texas Rangers. Now, they are just sitting at 9-9, but they're second on the relative power index as far as the opponents that they've played so far. And it looks like a rotation that's just sticking together pretty nicely. You've obviously got DeGrom, you've got Eovaldi, you've got Mackenzie Gore, who's been, I think, one of the more underrated pickups in baseball, and we touched on that preseason. And he's been a strikeout machine, and he's consistently giving them a chance to win. And then you've got both Kumar Rocker and Jack Leiter, more on the latter later. That was a tongue twister. The latter later, who are both kind of starting to show a bit of the promise that was expected from them when they were both drafted. So I love there that you've got, 2 absolute seasoned vets in Eovaldi and DeGrom. You've got a guy who's been doing it for a few years in Gore, and then you've got Leiter and Rocker, who are, starting to gain momentum at the back end of that rotation. That's a really nice team for me. You've got Corey Seager as hot as ever. You've got Jake Berger looking good with the bat. I think the Rangers are in a pretty good spot. They've let a couple get away. They dropped 2 of 3 to the Athletics, who are, by the way, the AL West leading Athletics, that they probably wish they could have back. But I think when you look at some of the struggles for Houston and Seattle early, the Rangers would take 9-9 with some easier games to come. So they're 3 teams to watch. Shock, I have invested in them to have good seasons. So far they are having good seasons, so don't be surprised if the wheels fall off in a big way over the next few weeks. But I think they're probably the highlights so far.
Yeah, that Texas-Seattle series this weekend is looming large, particularly what happened to Seattle today. I mean, that game just ended, I think, as we came on. Seattle was up 6-0, ended up losing to the Padres, a team that, I mean, you even sort of think that maybe their record is a little bit flattering. And look, I'm just trying to get on to Eric in live time here, because I can't remember what the stat was that he presented to us last year. And, it's impossible to remember, because every time he comes on with a goopy stat, it has like 17 caveats, and it's impossible to remember.
Half of them are Korean.
And half of them are Korean, which he can't read. He can't read English. I want to say that it was teams leading their division at the end of April have something like an 80% chance over the course of the last X amount of years. Again, I'm going to get this wrong at some point. That's why I was trying to get onto him, but he's doing God's work and calling the Australian Women's Championship. But it was something like that. So it was something like, after the first 30 games of a season, the way that the division standings look is in large part what is going to occur. Teams that are in a playoff spot at the end of April is largely 80% of the playoff field. If we look at the standings across baseball right now, it would be a bananas playoff scenario. Like, you'd have the Athletics in, the Twins are leading the AL Central, the Rays,
Pirates.
The Rays are on top of the AL East. You've got the Pirates leading the division. The Marlins are just two games back or so of the Braves. It would be insane. So this has to be a year, I would think, where that statistic that Eric gave us 12 months ago is probably not going to hold up, or maybe it will.
Yeah, I think it might be one of the years where the NL probably looks about right. Maybe you're probably not going to get both the Reds and the Pirates making the playoffs, but you might. But I mean, the Cubs are 5th in that division and they're at 500. So you can tell that they've probably play. I mean, even if I look at this strength of schedule, there's a few of the teams that have had some easy or softer draws so far. Not discrediting anything from anyone in the Central, but they're obviously all not going to be in the hunt later in the year. But if you take the NL Central and the madness there out of the equation, the East and the West probably look about right. The Giants are dead. The Rockies were dead years ago. The Dodgers are on top, and the Padres and D-backs are probably fighting out for second and a wild card spot there. And then you've got the Braves, who are going to win the East, declared it, and maybe the Phillies and Marlins, probably fighting out for one of those wild card spots too. That's about right. The AL is insane. To your point, that the 10-7 Rays, the 11-8 Twins, and the 10-8 A's, and some of the teams that you would have had as good a lock as you could get for probably playoffs, like making playoffs at $1.20, $1.30. You got the Jays at 7-10 in a world of hurt. The Red Sox in much more pain. The Astros and Mariners both 3 games below 500. There would need to be a lot of correction from some of these teams to get that step back on track in the American League.
And look, maybe we'll do it again. I think we did an exercise last year at whatever point that was. Again, I want to say it was the end of April, but I could be getting it wrong, where maybe it's on average one team falls out of the playoff picture from each league on average. So maybe we'll do that after the dust settles a little bit. I mean, look, we're only midway through April, so we are jumping at shadows a little bit. But give it another 2 or 3 weeks, and I mean, you do start to have that true-ish sample size. I mean, when you get 20% of the way through the season, it's hard to ignore that what's in front of you isn't actuality, right? I mean, the statistical sample size of the data is large enough at that point to where you can start to take some of these teams seriously. And then, if the alarm bells are well and truly ringing for some of these teams now, I mean, it may be full-on evacuation in the next 2 or 3 weeks for teams like the Red Sox and some of those other teams that you've mentioned. Well, look, before we get to your tips, and look, am I posting this tonight? Are these Friday tips in Australia?
Yeah.
Cool. I like to do extra work on a Thursday, so thanks for that.
You're doing less work on a Friday.
Oh, I guess that's true. I'll be in the pub. Not a country pub, but I will be in the pub a little bit earlier on Friday.
Lion, shout out.
So before we get to the tips, and you got 2 for the Friday slate in Australia, there's a lot of really good series this weekend, which unfortunately you'll be on the road and in Port Lincoln. I'm not sure if they have televisions in Port Lincoln. I'm sure they do. They
Just
have an
chocolate.
airport. We'll get to that at the end. What are some of those series that you've got your eye on? Not necessarily from a betting standpoint, but just from an overall interest standpoint this weekend.
Yeah, so the first one is in that sort of chaotic AL West. When I was out there with the shotgun on Tuesday, sort of mercy killing a few teams, that the Astros were one of those victims to the point where I think the comment was, that they're on track to making this a 2-horse race in the AL West already between the Rangers and the Mariners. The Mariners have lost a couple of poor games recently. They're 1-7 on the road, so they're going to be very happy to get back home. But they now host the Rangers for a weekend set, and I think that looms as a really large series in the scheme of, if the Astros can't get their starting pitching figured out, which I'm not sure they can. And side note, Imai is now on his 3rd interpreter in 3 weeks. That doesn't sit well with me as far as like a guy who's settled in. And he was meant to bolster that rotation. I think the GM made some uninspiring comments about Hunter Brown's availability over the next month or so today as well. So the Astros are, a big danger for me. And I think Mariners Rangers are going to be the 2 teams to lock in on when the Athletics inevitably fall away. So I'm really excited to see that series between the Mariners and the Rangers. And I think we're going to get some great pitching matchups. Rocco went today and Leiter goes tomorrow for the Rangers. So that means we're going to see DeGrom, Eovaldi, and Mackenzie Gore against Seattle. I'm really excited to see that one. The Mariners, their record at home is great, but for the Rangers, it's a chance to maybe create a little bit of a buffer if they were to take that series 2-1 and position themselves quite well for a bet that was, I think, 420 preseason for the AL West. So I'm keen to watch that. I'm really keen to watch the D-backs Blue Jays, obviously. I think the D-backs are in great form with that road series or that road trip taking 6 of 9 to now head back home where, we've only seen them for 4 games there and they split a set against Atlanta, against a Blue Jays team that desperately needs to get it figured out. I don't know if you saw the error today from the catcher for Toronto that cost them the win. But their catching play alone since Kirk went down has probably caused 3 or 4 losses, like directly from misplays defensively from a catcher. I know they lost 2 to the White Sox in similar fashion. It's probably a little bit scary as a D-backs fan because I do think this Jays team is going to click at some point. Like, I'm not putting them on death watch at this stage at 7-10, given the injuries they've got. You've got Eric Lauer going the first game with a 7.8 ERA against Soroka, who's been one of the best unexpected, underrated pickups. I mean, the D-backs picked him up to put him in the bullpen, and instead, with Merrill Kelly coming back this week, they've moved Brandon Pfaadt to the bullpen. So Soroka's been amazing. And then game 2, you've got Max Scherzer against Zach Gallen, and Scherzer was lit up in his last start for 8 earned runs, and his ERA is now just a hair under double digits. Zach Gallen's been surprisingly solid so far. So yeah, I don't know if the expected pitches are out for game 3 yet. Yeah, and then Kevin Gossman versus Ryan Nelson, which is probably advantage Jays in the third. Well, definitely advantage Jays in that third one. But on paper, I mean, game 1 and 2 there clearly favor Arizona from a pitching point of view, and the lineup's been so much better for Arizona than probably expected, given a few key guys are out. I'm scared the Jays are going to figure it out, but it's going to be a really exciting series because if the D-backs take 2 of 3 there, you're 13-9 flying. The Jays were to drop 2, they're going to be 8-12, and at some point over the next couple of weeks, we might be having to have an uncomfortable conversation with Eric if that kind of plays out that way. I think they're probably the 2 big ones. The third one that did catch my interest as well, Mets Cubs at Wrigley, will be a lot of fun. 2 clearly underperforming teams. I mean, the Cubs are 9-9, which has them technically 5th in the division, and the Mets we've spoken about at length over the last week or 2, and it hasn't gotten any better. Since they were shut out again when we spoke on Tuesday, they've scored 3 runs since then, and one of them was kind of a consolation run today against the back of the bullpen Dodgers, who'd taken an 8-1 lead by that point. I think the Mets and Cubs, that series looms as if one team is to sweep the other, it is alarm bells in a big way, particularly if that team were to be the Mets. If they get swept at Wrigley, they're 7-15. I think it's a hell of a long way back.
Fastball Freddie and Jameson Tyone starting the Saturday game in that series as well. So that'll be a fun watch for us on Sunday morning. Look, one series you didn't mention before we get to your tips, and you've got 2 for Friday. Atlanta and Philadelphia. I found myself watching a lot of Phillies games for whatever reason. And I understand more and more why that fan base is, insufferable. But I mean, a lot of it has to do with just because they're people from Philadelphia. And I can say that because I have several really good friends from Philadelphia. But it's just a team that finds a way to frustrate the hell out of their fan base. But a game that I'm really looking forward to, 2 guys that I know that will feature oftentimes on this podcast for the next 6 months and probably beyond, is the Saturday night's a nationally televised game on Fox. It'll be Sunday morning here in Australia, but Chris Sale and Chris Sanchez on Sunday Australia time. That for me has to maybe be the pitching matchup of the weekend from a wagering standpoint, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I mean, Chris Sale just had the primetime Sunday night baseball start against the Guardians, and I kind of struggled with how to play that game and ended up just having a couple of quiet side bets on Acuna and Olsen, which came up late. Chris Sale's strikeout line was 6.5, and it's almost always 6.5, and the Guardians are a pesky strikeout prevention team. There's a very good chance that line goes up 7.5 in that game on Sunday against the Phillies off the back of, Philly are striking out a lot. Showed it with 11 strikeouts today. A lot of swing and miss in that Phillies team, and Sale still got to 6 even against the Guardians, and he actually kept getting better as the game went on. He just had one inning that cost him 30-something pitches, and that's happened all 3 of his starts so far this year. But there's a good chance we see a 7.5 there, and probably a decent chance we see. Well, I think we're definitely going to see 6.5 for Sanchez. So you're going to be looking at $1.80, 14 plus combined strikeouts, which is a terrifying betting proposition. I think you're really going to want to lock in on one of those sides out of the other. And if I was to pick one, it would be Chris Sale against a Phillies team that's striking out a ton, especially when you look at all the lefties in that lineup, like Schwarber, Harper, who are happy to swing and miss because they're hunting home runs. That's a negative matchup against a Chris Sale slider. Whereas Atlanta have been the 5th best strikeout prevention team in baseball this year. And off the back of a nice start for Christopher Sanchez, if that line was to jump to 7.5 because he just got 8, I'd be taking the under there into the Sale overs and seeing if I've got the the crystal ball right on that one.
And not so much with Sale, but the worry with Sanchez is always how deep into the game is he going to go? Because, I mean, when you're on strikeouts, you don't necessarily care how they're performing otherwise, but they need to be performing well enough to where they at least go 6 innings to be able to get you to that point. I think oftentimes, the worry with Sanchez can be how deep into a game is he going to pitch, and if you've got to take a combined 14 for these two guys, if Sanchez has an off day and he does probably once every 3, once every 4 starts, you're then asking Chris Sale to maybe strike out 10, 11 potentially to get you to that mark.
And I think what I've seen a lot, and part of why their strikeout rate is where it is with the Braves, is they have these pesky long ABs, where they're just fouling off pitches. Like Matt Olson's really good with it. But guys like Ozzy Albies can just stand up there and foul off like 7, 8, and 9. And I mean, I've been betting strikeouts a long time. When you strike out a guy on the 10th pitch, it doesn't really feel like a win because you have a few of those per appearance, and all of a sudden it's very difficult. Like to your point, the overall performance doesn't matter, but if you're going to give up a home run, just give it up on the first pitch, not on a 3-2 count on the 7th or 8th pitch where you get nothing for it. I think if the Braves are going to be this pesky team that keeps fouling off pitches, which they have been so far, then Christopher Sanchez is going to need to be sharp early. So I definitely like the matchup more for Sale on paper.
Well, it happened today, right? You just mentioned Shota Imanaga there. I mean, it would have been, I think you said it was 14 plus combined for him and Jesus Luzardo today, and Luzardo gets pulled early, and I think had 3 strikeouts or 4 strikeouts or something. So, we're asking Shota Imanaga to equal his career high in strikeouts, which he did, essentially to get to a number that was just above even money. So that's always the risk when you've got a guy that's a bit rocks and diamonds like Chris Sanchez.
Yeah, and that's the safety factor of the combined strikeout pricing and why you probably sometimes take unders. Because if you were to go in today knowing that Shota Imanaga was going to strike out 11, you probably would have got 41-1, or maybe even a little bit more than that. And instead, you get out with a $2.10 win that feels like an escape because Luzardo didn't have his best stuff. But that kind of ceiling side of it is where the strikeout combined market can sometimes be the better play long term.
Just having a look at, oh, goodness gracious, it's probably going to line up that Jesus Luzardo is facing Chicago in his next start, but at Wrigley. So, boy, oh boy, if he didn't have a good outing against him at home, who knows what's going to happen early in the week.
I'm just going to quickly bring up the preseason post we had around strikeout futures, and they've been a mixed bag so far as where they've all been. I think what we've talked about doing is at the end of every month I'll post a good, bad, and ugly check-in on how they're all tracking. But I think Shota's was just ridiculous pricing, and he would be absolutely flying right now as far as where he's at. Yeah, he was
his number was like what was the number? 130?
140 at 235 and 160 at $6. I mean, he must now be well north of 35, I would have thought. He's at 31, so he's gone 7, 4, 9, 11 in 4 starts. So, if he's going to do that 8 more times, that's 240 odd strikeouts, which probably isn't going to happen. But $1.40, 235 secured preseason is looking quite pretty right now.
Splitty City, baby. I love watching Shota pitch. Despite how much I despise the Chicago Cubs, watching Shota pitch is a joy, and it was fun to watch him carve up Philly a little bit earlier today. All right, Spoon, let's get to your tips for the weekend. And again, these are for Friday, Australia time, so the Thursday slates in North America. Those aforementioned Rangers, that's where we're going for your first best bet tomorrow. Rangers and A's on a Thursday night.
Yeah, so we had a 1-for-1 split on the Tuesday episode. Aaron Nola went 1 strikeout off, and he ended up starting $2.30 for 6 strikeouts. So that was a frustrating miss. But the Weathers Detmers 6+ each could not have been an easier watch, and ended up topping up on 14 or more combined. Weathers had 10 and Detmers had 9. So if you were laddering those SGMs, I reckon you could have got 71s about both guys to get 9. It was a really good play, and I want to go back to something similar here. And I really like the setup for Jack Leiter and Jacob Lopez tomorrow for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the Rangers are now the 4th worst strikeout team in baseball, sitting 27th, and Sacramento is sitting 29th. So you've got a couple of bottom 4 strikeout teams. And the way I want to play tomorrow is Jack Leiter and Jacob Lopez both to get 5 or more strikeouts in a same-game multi. Currently at $2.05 on Sportsbet, and a good time to add that Sportsbet are always, this year, the first team to post pitching props, which is interesting. It's been Bet365 historically for years, Sportsbet are now coming out first as the market makers. When we locked in that $2.40 about Weathers and Detmers on Tuesday, by the time Ladbrokes put theirs up, Ladbrokes and Neds are the same, so you can use either. The individual strikeout pricing per guy is always worse, without question. But when you same game multi them both, it was $2.95. So something to keep in mind for these kind of plays throughout the year, because that tells me you might get 250 tomorrow about Leiter and Lopez on Neds or Ladbrokes. If you look at their years so far, I mean, Leiter is sitting 94th percentile whiff rate. Like, he's been a lot better, I think, than people have realized. He's given up a few runs, and that's why he's got a 4.91 ERA. But he had a brilliant opening start against the Orioles, struck out 8. He had an even better start against the Reds and struck out 9. Then he ran into trouble with the Dodgers. He only struck out 4, he walked 4, and he gave up 5 earned runs. If you remove the Dodgers start, and honestly, if they keep going the way they're going so far this year, it's probably genuinely an analytical angle to remove poor starts against the Dodgers and just look at like the rest of the league, because they are kind of separating themselves very quickly from the rest of Major League Baseball, especially offensively. If you remove those two starts, I mean, 8 and 9 against the Orioles and the Reds, who are, where are we? Cincinnati 23rd and Orioles 21st in strikeout rate. Now he gets a matchup against the 29th strikeout team. I think it's crazy from his side that we're getting a $140 about 5 or more strikeouts, and I'll probably end up laddering his as well individually, because I think he's the better value of the two in the matchup. But then Jacob Lopez is a guy who I've been really interested in. He was 73rd% whiff rate last year, 85th percentile whiff rate this year. Hasn't quite had those numbers yet, but again, if you look at the opponent, he ran into the Braves first up. He walked 5, didn't strike out any, and the Braves have since proven that they are a really strong team. They're preventing the strikeout. They're having these pesky ABs, and they're taking their walks. So 0 strikeouts there, off to a rough start. Then he strikes out 5 Astros, who are the 3rd best strikeout prevention team in baseball, and he strikes out 5 Mets, who are, despite their struggles, they're not actually striking out that much. They're still top 10 in baseball. He then gets a matchup tomorrow against the 27th strikeout team. And what's also really encouraging for me is his pitch counts in 3 starts have been 91, 92, and then 96. So I think we're going to get depth from him. He's clearly got a plus matchup. So yeah, this looks like a spot I'm pretty confident in, and I will probably be looking at the combined strikeout markets. They might actually drop tonight, given it's an early game over there. I think any other sickos who want to wake up at 4:30 with me and watch Jack Leiter and Jacob Lopez pitch, then you can jump in my DMs and we'll talk. But yeah, that's how I want to kick things off. It's a formula I've had a bit of success with so far, taking the alt line a little bit lower, but taking both guys, because I think it just presents a lot of value tomorrow. The second
fun game
play,
too, sort of like we talked about. I mean, top of the table as far as the AL West is concerned at the moment. So, I mean, at some point, if the A's keep doing this, we're going to have to take them seriously, right? I mean, they're just such a laughing stock because of everything that's happened with the franchise and because of Sacramento and whatever else. But look, they've been fun to watch, and if they just keep doing this, particularly against other teams in their division, at some point we're going to have to take them seriously. So, no, looking forward to watching that.
They spent a bit of money on extending some guys too, which is the first time they've done that in 30 odd years or whatever it might be, which tells me that for once they might not be a team looking to just sell at the deadline, right? Like, obviously there was a lot of talk about the Mason Miller trade, and they still picked up the best prospect in baseball for trading him. But if this might not be a team that, is just going to be the bargain bin or the trade sellers at the deadline, if they are in a playoff hunt like they have been in recent years. Every time they started to look like a team that might make some noise, they traded away guys like Matt Chapman, Matt Olson, every starting pitcher ever. So yeah, the extension thing, I guess, poses a question. Is this now a new product? And by the time they get to Vegas, they want to have some level of star power. So if they're going to have the same team in August that they've got in April, that'd be the first time in a very long time for the franchise. I agree with you that we're going to have to start looking at them as more of a long-term stayer.
So looking at both Jack Leiter and Jacob Lopez in the Rangers A's game. Shout out to Jacob Lopez, actually. He went to College of the Canyons. That's a real place. That's an actual university.
Sounds like exists. A frat house.
It sounds like it would be in either Cooktown or Cowell, if I'm being honest. College of the Canyons. It's actually in Santa Clarita, California, which is probably one of the most expensive postcodes in all of North America. But I digress. The second place that we're going for your bets on Friday is Well, a team that we've talked a little bit about already, but you like the matchup between Seattle and San Diego in the final game of their series.
Yeah, and look, I'm prone to doing this sometimes. I take guys on trust, and sometimes it works, and sometimes, they are who they're showing they are. The guy I'm talking about here is Luis Castillo. So I've been betting baseball for a long time. I've never seen even money about over 4.5 strikeouts for Luis Castillo, ever. No matter who he's pitching, no matter whether it's the first start of the season. I mean, I think I had him 6.5 twice already this year. 4.5 is crazy. And I know it's against the Padres, and they are fourth best strikeout rate in baseball. They've been great at preventing the strikeout, but I can't ignore this as a guy who has consistently been able to strike out guys. And like I've done with the other two, I'll look at his starts so far. He struck out 7 Yankees in the first start of the season, and that was part of the perfect day that we remember very well, and ended up being part of an SGM at 11. So that was beautiful. He then went and struggled a bit against the Angels. It was a really weird game. He struck out 4 through 84 pitches and got a somewhat early hook. And then he ran into the Astros, which is not just a team who are great at preventing strikeouts and have been for a long time. They have seen Luis Castillo for a large chunk of his career. And I think you often find after a while, teams have a lot more tape on guys. They completely change the approach to a starting pitcher. And I would assume that Luis Castillo has made 30 starts against the Houston Astros, if not more. So it doesn't actually come as a huge surprise to me that they were all over him when you look at their strikeout rate and the amount of time they've had to see him so far. And even then, in what was a truly awful start, 7 earned runs, 10 hits, hooked on 91 pitches after 3 and a third, he still struck out 3. So if that's the absolute floor, I think 5 strikeouts against the Padres is clearly in range. If I'm wrong about him, I will add him to the list with Brayan Bello and a few other names who I won't touch again for the rest of the season. But I think it's a little bit reactionary when you look at some of the underlying stuff. And I feel like we're maybe forgetting who Luis Castillo is, and he can still be that strikeout guy. So give me over 4.5 at $1.90 in the match against the Padres tomorrow.
I was just trying to look this up on the fly, but I wasn't able to do it. I'm not quick enough. I'd be able to access that information on the MLB's research portal, but they keep changing the layout of the damn thing. So I was going to see just how many times Castillo has indeed faced various opponents, but I can't find it. So that's
I've got
me
it right
saying
here.
that well, then I have failed successfully. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the most has actually been the Chicago Cubs. I guess that goes back to his days in the NL Central, obviously. And the Brewers are 19, the Cubs are 18 starts, the Cardinals are 20. So yeah, I think a lot of that's dominated by his earlier NL Central days. If you look more recently, he's made 10 starts against the Astros. Let's see how he's gone against them in those 10 starts.
Oddly enough, that's probably due to the schedule shift as well, because of how much time he has spent out west. But you're not playing those teams as much as what you would have whenever he was playing in the NL Central without the balanced schedule.
It used to be 26 games. So
Yeah.
you were basically getting 5 per opponent per year, and now you're probably getting 3. So those 10 against the Astros have been in the last 3 years. He's got an ERA 3.9 against the Astros, which, if you sort by all opponents, is actually one of the worst. But I would imagine that that's gone up in a couple of recent starts. And not to say the Astros know what they're doing when it comes to like video technology and analytics, but I'm willing to forgive that start and trust in my guy tomorrow, for better or worse.
Well, I think if history tells us anything, the Astros probably have a sneaky way of knowing what's coming, particularly at their home ballpark. Well, Spoon, before we go, I'll recap those just now. Jack Leiter and Jacob Lopez, the combined strikeout numbers in the Rangers and A's game tomorrow, and then we're very much following in Luis Castillo and his start against the Padres as the Mariners look to bounce back from what would have been a crushing loss in that game a little bit earlier today. But we spoke about something before we go. We spoke about something a couple weeks ago, Easter. That was me asking how much chocolate that you had purchased for your significant other, and your answer was none, because obviously she's in Cowell, which you are going tomorrow. So the question on the lips of all of Australia and the entire world is, did you get some discount Easter eggs at least to take her to Cowell and introduce the lusciousness that is chocolate to a town that you declared 2 weeks ago probably doesn't have any and has never seen it before?
Yeah, I'm cautious of introducing something and then taking it away. I don't want to create an addiction that then
Or you're
can't
afraid
be
it's going to be
fueled.
like a biohazard when you take fruit into Perth?
Yeah, like there could be a chocolate ravaged community out there all of a sudden, and like everyone's whatever it takes to get their fix of Haig's chocolate. I've got to be careful with that, and I'm also a big believer of like my presents are the presents, so to speak. So I feel like me being there should be enough, and we can maybe tick off Easter, birthday, and Christmas all in one go in one weekend. I mean, if I'm missing, 8 NRL games, 9 AFL games, and 100 MLB games, it's got to count for something.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Spoon's presence is the present. And look, shout out to all of our listeners from Cowell. We love the place, and I'm sure Spoon will enjoy having a look around and maybe even visit the commercial hotel there in Cowell before he heads out to Port Lincoln. My South Australian geography is not great, but it's getting better thanks to this podcast. Well, we hope everybody has a lovely weekend. Be safe out there. Enjoy your weekend. Enjoy your baseball. Bye, everybody.